Hello and welcome to AleksConnects Creative Sandbox. This is Tony, my name is Alex, and today we are continuing free visualization. Yep. So let me prepare everything. Today is kind of a hectic day, so camera is not lagging, good, which means that we could close this one. Okay. And let's just go. So okay, today's stream is going to be a relatively quick one. We're not going to spend that much time. Okay, I forgot about chatbot. Since today is the 2-day stream, I mean 2-stream day, whatever, how to properly say it. So I'm streaming twice today. So one stream is going to be a creative stream, which will stream for about an hour or 1.5 hours, it all depends. And the second stream is going to be on YouTube Alex Tabletops, where we basically continue to stream Magic Arena. Yep, so without further ado, let's just start. So in previous session, in most cases, I talked about free visualization. Today I will continue to kind of talk about it, but at the same time, like, actually try to think, like, actually try to practically apply those things that we talked about previously. So let's just go. Also, I can't do anything but sound. It seems like it's too loud. I mean, it's kind of banging in my ears, and it forces me to yell, or at least talk relatively loud. So hopefully, since I can't change the sound here with this program, I guess, whatever. I will try not to yell too much. Let's check the sound and continue. Yep, sound works. So yeah, in previous session we basically talked about free visualization. I'm not going to repeat myself necessarily. The only thing that I will say is that free visualization, it's some sort of a way to work with conceptualizing. So basically putting your ideas down from your imagination. So you have a certain ideas, and you have to have the ability to turn this idea into a visual thing. And basically, and when we started to talk about free visualization and all those things that we covered yesterday, those things were mostly personal. I mean, this is my personal way of looking on free visualization based on what role I want free visualization to play in my overall creative process. So keep that in mind, that you might adapt those concepts to your own personal process if you will understand like why they are so important for yourself. But if you don't feel like this is something that it makes sense for you, again, just keep in mind that at some point it might will, because again, gesture, shape, this is something that helps us to tell a pretty good story on a beginning stage of the sketching, such as, like, for instance, this one. I mean, we integrated right here not necessarily shapes, although we kind of integrated shapes. Those shapes were uncontrolled and unintentional, quite random. But again, this is one of the ways to tell basically stories, using just shapes without creating any forms. Just use shapes, use gesture, and etc. So my goal at this point is to find my personal way of controlling the stage without necessarily having that much of a control. It's kind of a dissonance thing. I mean, it's definitely, one part of me wants to find a way to create freely. The stage has to be free in order to visualize freely. In order to call it actually free visualization, I truly want to make sure that we're going to create freely without being tied by theory, or basically like truly like express yourself like intuitively without necessarily keeping those things in mind. But at the same time, I believe we still have to think about certain things, because if it's just going to be a completely free process, it's not necessarily going to be efficient. Because in order to find efficiency and freedom, you have to practice this freedom to the point of automatism, or until it will become automatic, until it will become something that you will create in your sleep. Since we don't have this opportunity, this possibility, I kind of want to integrate like controlled amount of theory, but still maintain this creative freedom. So basically, I'm adding a control to this freedom by adding this theory that we talked about previously, which is basically a shape. Shape works within design. Gesture, which will help us to integrate storytelling. Again, this one integrates design, this one integrates storytelling. And form, or at least illusion of it, is going to integrate like the illusion of reality. And those three combinations will help us to, by shape and design, make not necessarily intuitive decisions, but more like a controlled decisions, where, for instance, if we're going to create a certain part of the body or a certain part of the character, we're going to intentionally choose a certain shape in order to dictate a certain type of story or express a certain type of emotion, or in most cases, again, as I said before, design basically supports story usually, and because of this gesture and shape, we have to find a way to combine them together. And this is something that I'm still not quite, like, I have a theoretical connection of those two in my mind, but I don't necessarily have a practical connection. And what we're going to do in this free visualization streams for now, until we will get to a lighting, which is going to be our next stage of kind of revisiting fundamentals. I kind of want to stuck a little bit on free visualization as some kind of an abstract topic, and while I'm preparing information for lighting, because again, as I said before, I don't necessarily know how to approach lighting yet. Part of me wants to approach lighting in a simple way, again, using our simplification that we designed. And part of me wants to talk about rendering part of the lighting when we're actually creating a final look. And you have to approach them quite differently, but at the same time, there's a lot of similarities there. And in order to not confuse audience and myself, I kind of want to first make sense of how exactly we need to approach lighting, and only then I will start to talk about it, and we're going to move streams towards that direction. But until then, we're going to work with, for now, lighting is just pending, so keep waiting, it's coming. And for now, we're going to focus on something a little bit more abstract, which is pretty hard to control, and we will try to come up with it during the streams, because again, lighting, this is something that you don't have to necessarily figure it out. It's already figured out. The only thing that you need to do is just basically put theory together, apply this theory in practice, and that's it. With this stage of visualization, which is the first stage of the visualization, which I decided to call a free visualization, which kind of looks like a conceptualization, and this is much harder to control. This is much harder to put to theory and then to practice. It's more like just you will figure out this free visualization just practically. The more you visualize, the more you draw, the more you practice, at some point you will start to notice certain patterns, and then you will utilize those patterns each time that you will draw. So and this is something that I still don't have. I have different variations of how I approach things, and before that I actually went through a slow progression. Again, I started with, instead of the shapes and abstract, I was focused around form the most. Because of this, we basically talked about simplification, which basically means that we talked about how to simplify things from a spatial standpoint, how to picture things inside in the space, and basically being able to rotate all those things in our brain without using references, or at least without being a slave to the reference, I should say. So free visualization is quite a different thing. So again, it's much harder to control it. It's much harder to find your personal way of visualizing things. But again, as I said before, to repeat myself, I decided that it has to be abstract. It has to be symbolic, because again, abstraction, this is something that is going to be intuitive. Symbolic thing will help us to add something controlled, something that people could perceive it, something familiar. We also kind of established that it has to integrate instruments such as shape as a primary, form as a secondary, and gesture as something in between. And one of the controlled things that, like, kind of understanding how exactly to control the quality of it is we need to understand that it has to be a clear idea. So no matter how we're going to create it, it has to be pictured clear. We have to have enough information in our visuals in order to create this first visual impression of our idea. And again, but there is a quality control here in terms of the fact that it's not necessarily supposed to be good quality. So it could be executed badly, but it has to be clear in, like, as the idea. So, and because of those kind of things, because of these control things, we established that we have an idea as a driving force, which is the whole thing, why we are talking about pre-visualization. I'm going to talk about the idea from the storytelling standpoint, because I'm more to storytelling. I want to add a lot of storytelling into work, so because of this, I'm going to talk about ideas from the storytelling standpoint. But as I said before, ideas could be not just something with the story. It could be just something with visual things, such as, I don't know, just based on appeal, based on visuals, not necessarily, it isn't supposed to mean something. It's just, could be just a visual idea. I forgot the word, so this is why I'm struggling with explaining it. Either way, continue. So again, shape is one of our instruments that basically will help us to control this visualization. Again, personally for me, but I believe this is the stage where you actually, it's better if you will start to utilize shape in this stage, because if your first stage of visualizing will integrate shape in a controlled way, your sketches will become much more alive and will have much more information than just random characters and random, basically, random lines drawn. So it just adds a little bit of control. And again, we decided that we're going to integrate control through association. I don't know why it's, yeah, through association, which is again cultural and natural symbolism. So when it comes down to the cultural symbolism, this is something that I didn't talk about. The problem with cultural symbolism, it all depends on the culture. So if you in one part of the world, these cultural things will be recognizable because they will be symbolic for this culture, and like and it's not going to work for every type of culture, and this is a problem with the cultural symbolism. So because of this, we have a natural symbolism, which basically adds something a little bit more universal to it. So again, cultural and some sort of a universal thing. So cultural thing is just basically something that works within a certain culture, associations that you will find within a certain culture, and natural symbolism. This is something that can be found in nature in every part of the world, doesn't matter where. So because of this, we have kind of two elements of control that will help us to integrate, I don't know, make better choices in design. Sometimes we're going to rely on cultural symbolism if it's not going to be too broad and too kind of restricted and too specific. We're going to use natural symbolism. Yeah, and composition, this is something that basically is outside of this association that we will apply through the insides of the form by using those three basic shapes and their variations. So again, this is a way for us to integrate design into this first stage of the pre-visualization. Form, again, since form is our secondary thing, we're not going to cover form that much. In form, the only thing that we're concerned with is the spatial placement, and since this is secondary, we don't want for this form to overtake the shape. And because of this, we're going to create just small illusions of this shape, and we're going to use 3 for now ways to integrate form into our free visualization. First one is overlapping, when basically one subject overlaps the other, as I said before. Second one is foreshortening and scaling, which is kind of the same. We're going to look at foreshortening. Foreshortening is basically something that works within one subject, where one part of the subject is closer to us, the other part of that same subject is further from us. It basically creates this foreshortening in space. Scaling is quite the same. The difference is those subjects are same in size, but they're different, but they are on a different planes. This is our, for instance, foreground, this is our background, and we just have to change scale of this subject in order to place it further from us. So again, works kind of the same as foreshortening, but on separate subjects. And another one, which is I basically added specifically for myself, is creating a kind of a directional thing. As I said, like for instance right here, I created some sort of a direction. So this one dictates the direction in which the head is looking. Right here we have a direction where head is looking. In most cases I'm going to use it for the head. I will think about how exactly to use it in different kind of situations. Maybe we'll find a different way of using it, but for now it's going to be used only in heads, because for instance right now I don't necessarily understand where exactly this person is looking at, but if I will create a explanation for it, then maybe we will understand better. Because again, we could do this differently. We could create certain marks and identification form lines right here in order to tell the same, but I don't want this to overtake the shape. Again, it's because it will create too many lines. By separating this direction thing, hopefully it will work better. Again, for now this is just a theoretical, but we'll figure out how to exactly apply it to practice. And of course I talked about exaggeration, which is again about gesture, which is again a storytelling element which will help us to connect shape and kind of gesture, or design and storytelling. Because again, storytelling, this is our main goal usually, and how to achieve storytelling is usually through design. So design is basically something that helps us to control the storytelling, or to basically intentionally use this storytelling and tell story intentionally. And also the gesture itself will of course help us to tell the story. When it comes down to gesture, one thing that we need to kind of create our own personal rules for that is every gesture has to be exaggerated. With exaggeration, gesture will give us more dynamic and more storytelling as a result, or at least more clear storytelling, because we not necessarily will be able to tell this one from far, but we're definitely going to tell this pose from far, because and understand better what this pose is doing, because it's kind of over exaggerated. So exaggeration is one of the first things that will help us to work with gesture. Second one is the balance of gravity, which is, again, I talked about it previously. It's quite a complex subject, because when it comes down to the balance and gravity, this is not something that could be explained theoretically. There is a way to explain it theoretically, but since we're working with a free visualization, I don't want for it to be too complicated. Like most of the gesture we're going to find by I don't know, by feeling most of the balance, most of the gravity. We're just going to understand that every part of the body has a certain weight, and since this weight is there, we have to counterweight everything that's happening in order to make sure that this figure is not going to fall off. So it has to stay grounded, or it has to basically stay relatively grounded when it's like, for instance, this guy is running, so it's not necessarily touches anything, but gravity still applies. There's still like gravity in hands, and gravity in legs, and etc. So we still have a certain kind of a thinking about the gravity. So again, gravity is quite a complex subject. There are ways to control gravity and think about the gravity, and there are rules for that which we will try to apply right here. But I don't want to do this super in controlled way. I kind of want to make sure that it's going to be quite free. Like for instance, we talked about it, this one, for instance, this guy is quite seems like it's crawling, and we understand that gravity actually pulls almost every part, and there is a quite equal distribution of the weight. Yeah, so most of the weight probably goes here, and the rest is basically distributed equally. So something like this. So I talked about the concept of dividing, which is still kind of work in progress, of dividing the body into two parts, and trying to balance, like trying to find this balance and maintain this balance from like the crotch area, which is going to be our center of gravity usually. So the crotch area almost always going to be the center of gravity, and the rest is just going to be divided into two parts, ideally. And this is for us are going to be kind of a simple, but at the same time not necessarily a true concept, but it will help us to create better balance, I believe. We'll look about that. We'll talk about that one a little bit later, once we will set this to practice. So me talking right now is just kind of setting my brain into practice, because again, for me it's quite hard to just right away start drawing something. I need to talk first. I need to prepare my brain into the type of thinking that I need to do through when I'm drawing, and then I will go to drawing. And since today's stream is quite short, again, we don't have that much time. I probably will stream for 30 minutes more, or maybe an hour max, and then we have to switch to the other stream on YouTube. So because of this, there is a chance that we're not going to draw today, but I will try. So again, dynamic is something that basically will help us to add the gesture itself, because like when we talk about dynamic, this is the core thing about the gesture. So basically when we talk about dynamic, this is basically gesture itself. Gesture basically creates, tells us a body language, so it tells us the line of motion, where this person is headed, where this person is moving towards, or whatever. So this is the way to basically add, again, a story by integrating a body language element to it. So again, usually one of the instruments of storytelling is the body language, at least if we talk about the character. And overall storytelling, this is basically quite different from the overall storytelling that we're talking about. This is just an instrument that will help us to tell stories inside the composition itself. So usually it's done by creating a gestural transitions or gestural direction from one subject to another. So for instance, this subject looks at this area, which is going to be our focal point. So like all these directions, they are going to be a storytelling lines that we will draw inside of our brain in order to create a like visual path for the viewer to follow. So when we talk about like the storytelling aspect, it's more like creating a visual path. Let's just, by the way, establish this one because it's kind of a visual path. Because I'm talking about storytelling here as a creating a visual path. This visual path is going to be kind of invisible. So again, first you will plan it. Like for instance, like visual path could start here, go from here, and then end up following here. It could go from here to here. So, and all those choices, like it's combination of the gesture that you created for your subjects with the gesture that, or with the dynamic that you create inside of the scene itself. So it's a little bit more complex subject. It's more like fits to the composition aspect. But again, with composition, we have a frames of the composition that will be created from the shape, and dynamic is given to create storytelling inside of this composition, inside of these frames that we created. So since I just figured out this one like right now, let's just create a like an example what this composition is going to look like. So it's like a frame for frame in form of shape. Let's just call it like that for now. and this is going to be a visual path inside the shape. Visual path inside the shape. The shape, I believe. Because we talk about a specific shape that we're working with, not just a overall shape. So, and visual path inside the shape. So again, storytelling, this is exactly it. So again, we have two things right here. You know how to properly call it for it to work. So again, dynamic is going to have two things. Let's just, I don't know. I'm going to create dynamics through the body language, and we're going to create dynamics through the storytelling. And storytelling, again, body language is going to be a kind of the same visual path inside the shapes, but it's more like applied for the body, and this is for a compositional shape. Let's just call it like this, inside the compositional shape, not just a regular shape. I believe this is something that we have to stress quite a bit. Again, I'm just trying to find a way to explain it better, and the more I will explain it to myself, the better I will be able to utilize it in practice. So yes, for now we're kind of spending time on this theoretical stuff, but it's temporary. We'll move on to the practice once theory will be cleared. Because for me, like, if I don't understand the theory behind something, it just seems for me like pointless to move forward. It's like I'm missing on something, and until I will understand it theoretically, I don't see any reason to try it practically, because I'm just going to waste time. And if I will spend time on working through it theoretically, that means that I will try to explain it, I will at least progress through it. But if I will just get to practice, it's just going to be, in most cases for me personally, like a waste of time. So because of this, I'm constantly relying on theory the most, because I'm a theoretical person. So again, visual path inside the compositional shape. Compositional shape. By the way, what we're doing right now is almost like creating a connection between like gesture and shape, because again, I said before that they have to be connected somehow, and this is like a way for me to find this connection. So again, the composition is basically will connect right here. So composition is going to connect with dynamic. At least this is the way that I'm going to look at this. So again, dynamic is going to be our body language. So let's just repeat ourselves in order to put this inside my brain as a like rule that I have to stick to. But because again, the more you repeat this to yourself, the better you will understand it. Because like if you just read it once, okay, it's kind of okay, I read it, but like I'm not necessarily going to use it, because okay, I just created those things, but I'm not necessarily going to use them because I didn't learn how exactly they're going to be used. So what I'm doing now by repeating every time, like what we have to think about, is just basically adjusting my brain to this as the most important thing that we have to think about automatically without using this kind of I don't know, graph. We also will create quite an interesting checkbox a little bit later, once and we're going to place it beside every sketch. So how it's going to work, every time that we're going to work on a certain, for instance, sketch, we're going to place kind of a list of things, and all those things are going to be, of course, listed, the important things that we have to think about. They also going to have a step-by-step kind of following process, and we're going to methodically check everything. So for instance, we're going to start with the gesture. For instance, gesture is going to be the first thing. Yeah, solve the gesture. The next one, okay, adding a shape to this gesture. Okay, adding a shape to this gesture. Done. and etc. And basically we're going to kind of create a cycle of working with things, because I don't believe that we will be able to establish all gestures at the same time, all shapes at the same time. So we kind of have to create a some sort of a loop that we will repeat when we're going to work with gesture. It feels like we have to do it. So let's just establish like this is something we have to create. Loop or cycle, whatever. So we're going to use this loop to basically work on things and create them step by step. And this loop is going to be created from a complete, clear theoretical understanding of this thing. So the more I will understand the connection between those two, and when exactly to integrate this and how exactly to integrate this, the better I will create this loop cycle. And it will help me to actually start to work on practice, because again, one of the things that stops me from doing the practice, for instance, when I did this one, I sat for about like 30 or 40 minutes not knowing what to do, and then I just started to draw and solutions start to basically kind of happen, but I still don't have a control how exactly I create it, so that means that I'm not going to be able to reproduce it. So for me, control is all about understanding what you're doing and what step-by-step process of what you're doing, and then being able to reproduce it. If you can't reproduce the same result, that means that you don't know what you're doing. You just kind of I don't know. It means that you, every time that you create something, you kind of I don't know, hoping for a winging it, not necessarily controllably created. I don't know. The same was for this one. I mean, when we drew this in the last session, I truly didn't know how exactly to approach it. I was so confused of trying to figure out with like what type of shapes to use here, how exactly to create a form. Then throughout the whole session, the only thing that I created is this one, and it's not necessarily tells us anything. It's just a regular pose. When right here we actually have some sort of storytelling, which we don't have it right here. Although we could say that we could add some type of storytelling even here. So for instance, the fact that this guy is looking somewhere out there, that means that he probably was running and got distracted by something out there. So even right here we could actually add a story by adding a certain elements right here and create a focal point around them and explain why exactly this guy or gal, it all depends, is looking at, which basically distracts the view. Because again, if this pose was running towards something, the head probably would be placed right here and it would be much more straighter, and overall dynamic was directed out there because of the fact that this guy is actually focused on running towards, which means that focus is out there. But when I create this rotation, it seems like this guy is running, but then suddenly something appeared in its peripheral vision, which basically make him to distract himself. And now overall gesture kind of supports it. So now he's running, like not necessarily focused on running itself, but now he's more like a distracted from running, and because of this, his gesture now appears somewhat hectic and somewhat distracted and somewhat disruptive. So it still works. I mean, you still could create a story from it, but again, this is one of the ways how the gesture and the sudden changes, and even this like placement where person is looking at, where his direction is going, etc. These are small things that we will use to tell the story. But when I created this, I didn't had this idea. Like, this is just that idea that I come up with right now, like the fact that the guy is looking at something right here, because I didn't necessarily have a control over creating this, which means that I'm not going to be able to reproduce it on a constant basis. And what we will try to do right now is find a controlled way of doing kind of the same thing, but being able to reproduce it each time, and that way our sketches will become consistent, because there is an inconsistency with this sketch and this sketch. Both sketches could tell a story, both sketches hold on its own, but the problem is that they are inconsistent. It seems like they're both drawn by different people, which again, like, works even around the style. I mean, if you want to develop a style, you have to stick to a certain way of doing things and then make it better, better. And the more you will repeat this, the more chances that you will develop a style from it. But if you're just basically creating each of your sketches are completely different, which means that you are confused and you don't necessarily understand how to do things, psychologically at least. And this psychological incompetence, I would say, because I would call it incompetence, will catch you at some point, and it might basically lead to pretty disastrous results. So because of this, I want to kind of find a way to control things. Again, I'm not a control freak. There are, like, I understand that I want to control all the things that I can control, and I'm not going to try to control things that I can't control. But I still kind of, if I know that I probably will be able to control this, and because of this, I will better try to do so. So again, we don't have that much time. Let's just continue. So again, we have exaggeration, we have balance and gravity, we have dynamic, body language, and storytelling. So basically, storytelling, this is our way to create visual path inside compositional shape, and this is our compositional shape. Let's just call it frame in form of shape, or it's better be called a compositional shape. So again, we slowly trying to give names to those things, and by giving those things explanation and names, now we're starting to connect those together, which is pretty cool. Which is again the whole point. We need to connect. We need to create a connection inside of our brain, how to use shape and how to use gesture to our advantage, and actually use them, but not just understanding, okay, that's a shape and this is gesture, whatever, I don't know how to use them properly. Okay, frame in form of shape, which is going to be a compositional frame or compositional shape. Let's just call it a compositional shape. This is kind of a different explanation what this means. So again, frame in form of a shape, I believe. In front of a shape, frame it in front of a shape, in form of the shape, which means that this is a compositional shape. This is what I talked about right here. So this is going to be a compositional shape that is going to be outside of our subject. I still don't know how exactly to use it, because this is something that we need to come up with, like how exactly to use it. Usually this compositional shape is, I don't know, it's not necessarily going to be a silhouette of whatever we're drawing, but it actually might be a silhouette. But I don't believe that we need to think about it as a silhouette, because it's too complex. We need to simplify it. So if we will simplify it, that means that we have to create a shape that will support the dominant directions of each part of the pose. So for instance, the dominant part of this part it's kind of this slightly curved line. We could create just a straight line right here, because we don't necessarily have that many curve changes. We also don't have that many curve changes right here. This one kind of creates this type of direction. Yeah. Right here, if we're going to think about the dominant look of this shape, it's probably going to be this, because you could just simplify the overall dynamic right here, and it will basically create this type of dynamic. You could also continue this line in here, because it's kind of flowing up to this point, probably. Again, this is just a theory. I don't know what I'm necessarily doing in here. I'm just trying to think of how we could use this compositional shape, how we could create this compositional shape and actually, because right now I'm creating a compositional shape from already existing some sort of a composition, and I'm just trying to find a way how to explain how we could find this compositional shape, because usually this is something we'll start with. Ideally, compositional shape is going to be either our first thing that we're going to draw, or the second thing, and based on that, like before we'll understand its placement in this loop, because I don't know if it's going to be a second one or the third one. We need to kind of reverse engineer things quite a bit. And right here we have something like this. So yeah, like this could be an actual shape, like compositional shape for this kind of sketch. And we're going to think about the ways to just place it separately and make it smaller. And I also want to copy this one in order to explain like where I got this from. So yeah, let's just assume that this is going to be our compositional shape. There's still a lot of questions. What are the boundaries of this compositional shape have to be? Do they have to touch each other, like to connect completely, or I don't even know. No, this is something to think about, because usually, oh snap. What's happened with the stream? Just kind of lagged. So yeah, we're going to think about compositional shape in this way. I believe that this one is going to be quite deeper in space. Yep, it's going to be something like this. So that way we might actually could think about how exactly we could create a compositional shape. This is something that could dictate the overall kind of feel of this composition. And of course the rest is going to be created inside. For this one, compositional shape could be, if I would try to integrate like an additional thing that this person is looking at, I probably would extend this compositional shape, but since we didn't, let's just try to come up with the way. And this compositional shape it has to support the dynamic, because the guy is running, and which means that most of the things, they have to be quite dynamic, the overall shape. Okay, let's just do this on a separate layer. Again, what I'm doing right now is just trying to come up with the idea of how to work with this compositional shape. Maybe we could just create those type of weird connections right here. I don't know, like, does this has this dynamic or not? I don't know. Again, it's a question. This thing about compositional shape, this is kind of a new concept for me. I heard about it a lot of years ago. Then we talked about it a couple of streams ago, and now I truly kind of thinking about this one as a part of integrating something into the process, but I still don't understand it exactly. I mean, how to make it a part of my process. I understand the theory behind it, but as I said before, if you understand the theory behind something and not necessarily being able to make it a part of your process, that means that you just understand the a overall concept of what it means and what it does. But you still have to work on making it a part of your process. And this is something that I'm kind of struggling with now. I'm trying to find a way to make it a part of my process, and that's not necessarily an easy task. Thinking about the choices, why exactly I chose this line, why exactly I choose this line. Maybe I choose this line because we have quite a straight line right here, and it seems like it's a completely separate line. Why I didn't went by just kind of creating a simple silhouette right here, maybe because I tried to capture the overall movement, like what's happened between this part and this part. And maybe because of this, it's not going to be necessarily a straight line, because usually legs are moving in a curve. Because of this, we might actually choose this type of form to support this movement. So again, this movement starts from here, which is kind of, this angle is created by this, like by overall angle, which could actually tell us that we need to place this leg a little bit higher and quite pointy too. I decided to create this line. Let's think why. Because I wanted to create a sense of direction that will end somewhere where a person is looking at. If I want to create the sense of direction, again, this curve line is going to, again, only straight lines. Again, if you work with straight lines, they will help you to create more speed. And there are the reasons why when we are moving, everything looks like a straight line. Because straight line is basically when we're moving too fast on a train or on a car, everything around, like everything from the side basically looks like a straight line. We rarely see curves, unless we are moving like this too. That way, everything which is supposed to look straight is going to look curved. But again, it's just kind of supports the movement. And since movement right here is quite straight, these straight lines will pull attention of this overall composition out there, which means that it's kind of already working. And this curvature is going to pull attention from this area, from the ground. And also considering the fact that there is an empty space right here, and overall point of interest is going to be the head in most cases. So because of this, I decided to basically make this line as straight as possible, because it will create a, like, in order not to create too many problems right here, because again, the spine area is not going to concern us in a composition. This is not something that we're interested in. We're interested to pull the viewer right away into this kind of point. And maybe because of this, it kind of seems like a good idea to simplify the shape to something like this. That actually could work. Let's just use the same right here. Like, would we... So again, these straight lines are pulling the attention of the viewer closer to this part, which means that it's going to be closer to this part. So it might work too. This curved line pulls attention away from itself. And again, we have an overall general shape that viewers pulling attention from closer to this angle. And no matter how viewers is going to look, and from what angle viewers is going to look at it, it's always going to end up in the corner, because this is where the overall kind of movement goes. Again, I'm just theorizing. I'm not 100% sure if it actually works or not. It might not, but okay, thinking about it, it's kind of makes sense. It kind of works. So again, straight lines are fast. This is, by the way, one of the ways to use not necessarily the shape itself as a compositional design tool, but the lines as a compositional design tool, because lines could play multiple roles. So I probably should talk about like what the role of line could be. It doesn't seem like a bad idea. Since we don't have that much time to draw things, we could actually kind of think about the properties of the line. Frame, inform the shape, compositional shape. So, because again, just thinking about the compositional shape as just something that has to be just solid, and the shape itself has to represent something, it's not necessarily tells me anything for now. So I don't believe that the shape dynamically represents like the overall design of the character, because it's not. And this is where I'm having trouble with this compositional shape thing. Like, should we create this compositional shape not basing it on the overall shape design itself, but make the shape design to support each part, each side of the character? I don't know. This is something to think about. And if so, that means that we have to think about the shape now, not from the overall shape standpoint, but from the each line standpoint, what these lines will represent. And if so, we need to think about the properties of the line. The thing is that this thing is not going to be visible. I mean, what I'm talking about right now is more like a picturing something outside of your character as a shape that could dictate how character could be perceived. Because this is a negative spaces. I mean, viewer is going to look at this, and viewer is not going to see those lines, but viewer potentially could look at overall kind of dynamic. Look that, okay, we have a point right here, we have a point right here, we have a point right here, we have a point right here. And these points will create a certain shape. And this shape will tell the overall movement of this character, potentially. I wish it would be easier. Like to understand this concept, but... Okay. Okay, we will work on it. Okay, let's just create the same thing for this. Connect them together. When things work in theory, you have to make to work them in practice too. Yeah, it actually doesn't seem like this thing is going to be straight. But again, if I want to pull this tension there, it's kind of supposed to be straight. We could make this line actually a little bit curved because we have a head right here. And then this line could be just go straight there. It's not necessarily going to work the way that I would want to. But again, let's just experiment and see how to integrate this compositional shape. There is an angle right here. We at least have to make those lines quite sharp. This one is going to be probably curved. I actually don't know how to use this thing. Like, this straight line will probably direct viewer right here, but the fact that it's going to curve right here will... Maybe we'll pull attention right away here. But I would actually create something like this. And created something that viewer is looking at. There. And that way, pull this composition into this direction. Again, it's quite complex subject. Especially if you're trying to understand what it is. Okay, let's just not set on that too much. Let's just continue. So again, we have a frame in front of our shape. We have a compositional shape overall. So the frame in form of the shape. This is our compositional shape. So this is the meaning of compositional, composition in the shape department. So we're thinking about the composition from the standpoint of the shape. So okay. And since this is a frame in form of a shape, or our compositional shape, our storytelling that we will tell inside of this shape is going to be a visual path inside of this compositional shape. So again, there's going to be shape inside, and inside the shape there's going to be a visual path. So again, shape, and now we have a path inside of the shape. So this is a path, this is a path. Like every time that viewer is looking at something, this is an automatic path. I don't believe that this one is going to work within a path, although yeah, we could create a path right here from this leg to this leg, from this leg to this kid. Then it basically goes like continuously goes there. Then this could be another path. So again, there's multiple ways to create a path inside of this overall composition, and everything outside of it is not going to matter. Like, only thing that will matter is going to be what's inside of the shape, and we're going to think about those directions and those paths as something for the viewer. So again, there's multiple ways of creating this path. There's going to be so many paths that, like, I'm not going to be able to predict all those paths. Like, some of the viewers will see those paths, some of them not. But again, the more paths we will create in a composition, the more interesting this composition potentially could become. And that means that viewer is going to be able to look at this for small portion of the second more than just glance at it and move forward, and like move from it. Again, this is just a concept. Hopefully it will work though. So, like, it's pretty hard to tell stories when you have only one subject, for me personally, because like, since we have this guy and like the composition itself is not finished, I mean, as I said before, ideally I would place something out there that this guy is looking at, that's something basically that distracts this guy from running. And once I will create that, like, almost every path that I will create has to support this, has to move towards this area, like these lines. Most of those lines are going to be invisible. The only one who's going to intentionally control them is the artist itself, himself or herself. The viewers might might see the portions of them, but not all of them. So that means that we could actually put this leg a little bit higher in order to create this dynamic. As I said before, we could make this leg more straight, which could work. I mean, this is, by the way, the changes that I'm implementing based on the composition that I'm trying to analyze. I mean, if this is going to be our focal point, I have to make sure that I will create those inside lines that will lead to this focal point. And in order to lead to this focal point, every decision that I'm going to make in changing those directions will have to support it. So again, all shapes are not going to meet. Like, it's going to be not like completely boring if we're going to create all shapes that will direct only into one place. We have to create contradictory shapes that will kind of overlap and stop viewers from following there. So we have this, which is kind of a contradictory shape. Kind of seems like it separates composition, which means that probably have to extend the overall composition, and probably if we will make a focal point, this focal point is going to be somewhere out there. And that means that now we have the space that could be a continuation of this line and actually lead to the compositional focal point, not making this arm just interrupted. So again, this is just a concept, how to view this compositional shape and how to create those lines inside of the shape, which is the dynamic storytelling. Here it is, so dynamic storytelling. And body language, it's more, so for instance right here we don't necessarily have a body language. I mean, the body language for this pose just tells us that this guy is running, that this guy kind of stops running because he was distracted by something, and the body language kind of supports it, like storytelling wise. But the storytelling that I'm talking about right now, like this visual path inside of the compositional shape, this is something that kind of works within body language, but it focuses around the overall composition, not on the like inner composition, or should I say, I don't know, the subject composition. So the composition of the subject is going to be his body language, or her body language, depending on the subject. And the storytelling dynamic is going to be something that will kind of combine both things together. This is something that will tell the dynamic of the story itself, what's happening. Not like what's happening with this guy necessarily, but what's happening in the overall composition. So it kind of will make sense of it creates sense for the story. It now explains why this guy stops running, why this guy is moving, like looking at there, and etc. So it's more like an explanation. Which means that so what we're talking right now kind of tells me that these two parts are kind of one of the most important things. Let's just establish them as quite important things. So composition and dynamic, first thing first, they work together. This is something that we have to understand. They are working together. Let's place this one right here. This is actually quite separate. This is, by the way, a combination of shape itself with the gesture. So this is something that kind of has to be a combination of two. So good, at least we now connected two pieces together. So now we know how storytelling is going to connect with design, and part of the design right here is going to be a compositional thing. So how to connect our compositional shape with the dynamic storytelling. But the next thing that we have to create a connection with is the body language part with this, with the association part. Because I believe balance and exaggeration, it's both of these things are kind of technical. This is not something that we could intentionally implement as like to tell the stories, because gravity, this is something that you have to think about in order to create a more realistic pose. Exaggeration, this is something that you will create to enhance the overall feeling from the story, but this is not necessarily something that is kind of, I mean, we're definitely going to think about them, but it's not something that we can directly use intentionally. It's more like going to think about them, which means that we're probably going to use them, but I don't believe that they will connect with composition or with association. Although balance actually could add to the association, because one of the things that could make our characters culturally or naturally recognizable by adding the symbolic element to it is a weight distribution, the way that pose is actually standing. If pose is going to be drawn in a certain way, it already creates a certain look. But again, this is a body language then. I mean, and body language itself has to contain both of them. So I believe exaggeration and balance, they are kind of a derivative of the body language. Hopefully I call it like created and wait a second. Derivative. It's basically a derivative of the body language, which kind of means that our dynamic part, it's kind of the most important thing. And right here, composition is one of the most important things. But what I want to learn is how to use association as the main thing, because again, composition is something that will help us to just basically create a context for the story. But we need to find a way to add association, because association, this is something that will attract the viewer. So again, composition and dynamic storytelling, this is something that will keep viewers engaged, ideally, but we need to have something that will attract the viewer. And association and overall body language, this is something that attracts. Let's just think about that way. So again, it could be a good idea to actually write this down, because this is quite interesting information that I'm like coming up with now. I might use it later. Okay, we have about 15 minutes till the end of the session, so I need to kind of go a little bit faster here. Yeah, they actually work both. They work both like together. I believe the compositional thing will work with body language too. But I still kind of want to find a way to connect body language with the association thing. So let's just write down that composition and storytelling will engage the viewer. Engages the viewer. Just viewer. So engages the viewer. Hopefully I write it and engage. No, not engage. I mean, it all depends how you look at engaging. I look at an engagement as something that's not attracting, but instead making viewers stay and look at this work for a longer period of time. Let's just call it engaging. And association and body language, this is something that we have to come up with, like connect them together too. Yeah, we don't have that much of a place for it, so let's just create a quite weird transition. So association is going to be a way to attract the viewer. So again, body language, we're pretty good at reading body language, and this is something that we're doing instantly, and because of this we need a couple of seconds in order to read the body language, or even like less than a second to read the overall body language. The same goes with associations. I mean, it's enough to look at something for a pretty small amount of time and right away understand what associations we are having from it. So because of this, we're going to talk about those things doing a different job, and based on that, maybe it will help us to come up with the better solutions for them. So again, this is engages the viewer. We have to write A right here. So engages the viewer, and this one is going to attract the viewer. Because again, attraction, this is something, I don't know, that this distracts the viewer. This is more like an instant thing. In English, they're quite the same. It's like a synonym. Synonym. So engage occupy, attract. Yeah, let's just call it attract. And we're going to view them a little bit differently. Attracts. So this one is basically attracts the viewer. Just creates a disruption that makes viewer disrupted from whatever viewers is doing. So basically just an instant reaction. Engages, this is something that goes a little bit deeper. So forces viewer to stay longer. So again, first is attracts, and then viewers understands, okay, now I'm feeling like this thing is now has my intention. What now? How to make sure that this attention is going to be gratified somehow, in some way. And in order to get the gratification from the attraction, we need to engage now in this piece of work by compositional thing. The funny thing is that what I'm talking about is, again, since we're creating it for a personal use, we're probably not going to show this free visualization work, which is going to look probably badly executed, but with a clear idea to the viewers. But still a good idea to actually think about these things in the beginning, because again, in order for us to go through all these stages of visualization and keep the same kind of overall idea, how we want to attract the viewer, how we want to engage the viewer, and make sure that the viewer will stay and look at our work for a longer period of time, we need to think about it right from the beginning. And I believe, although yes, we're not going to show viewers this stage, but if we're going to think about those things right from the beginning, and already we'll have a certain instruments that will help us to do this, I believe it's actually quite a cool thing to have. So yeah, so basically first one is basically attracts the viewer, and the second one is engages the viewer. So again, the first thing that happens is basically viewers being attracted by our work potentially, and the second one, we have to make sure the viewer will stay engaged in our work. So because of this, both of these things, they have to kind of connect together. So which means that now we just how to probably say it, we now just don't have we not only just have this information now, like composition, association, now we actually have a way to connect them and have a reason why to utilize them. Okay, stream speed is dropped. So yeah, we have about 10 minutes till the end. Let's just like sum it up quite well. So again, dynamic of the body language. This is something that works with association. So every body language that we will create now has to be supported by a shape. So again, body language, I'm looking at body language as a true gesture. So again, like this is the overall gestural line for this one, and now we need to create a supporting shape for this gestural line. So connect this gestural line to the to the shape that we'll create right here. So then we'll create like a secondary gestural line that will be connected with the shapes and etc. So this is the way that I'm thinking about it for now. Let's just save. Okay, so if the way to work with association is going to be through body language and overall dynamic, this is the core element of the gesture. This is the gesture itself. These are just suggestions, like add exaggeration to your gesture in order to make it look more clear from far distances. Again, it's more, it works more for the attraction purposes. In order to attract viewer, we have to keep gesture a little bit more exaggerated. So I guess the exaggeration is going to fit this category of attraction. Balance is going to fit the category of association too, because again, it's probably not going to affect composition that much. So both of these things, exaggeration and balance, will actually fit to a body language. Let's just call these both like body language properties. So in order to create a good body language, we have to think about exaggeration and we have to think about the balance. And this way, of course, like balance kind of works with composition too in storytelling, but it's much more elusive concept than you think so. I mean, like the composition has to be balanced. For instance, like composition has to have its own center, and the overall composition has to be divided and properly balanced. This is much more complex subject. We're not going to talk about it yet. This is something that we will integrate on later stages of the composition. So the compositional balance, this is something that we'll integrate on compositional stage before the lighting stage. So yeah, let's just create a note that compositional balance, because I kind of want to make sure that we will utilize it later. So compositional balance, because I don't believe that we need to think about compositional balance right here. Again, the only way for us to think about composition in this stage is utilizing the compositional shape somehow. We need to find a way to do this, and working with creating a visual path inside of this compositional shape. These are the only two compositional properties that we have to integrate in storytelling purposes. Just again, composition is a way to create a story for me personally. So compositional balance. So compositional balance will be integrated on or at, let's just create on a compositional stage when we're actually going to work on a composition itself. Like the composition is going to be the core thing that we're going to work with. On a compositional stage. Let's just call it composition stage. Okay, good. So compositional balance will be integrated on composition stage, or stage of the composition. For those like I'm not familiar what I mean about the compositional stage, here it is. So the compositional stage is this stage. This is going to be our second stage of the overall creative process, and we're going to keep it the same quality as the free visualization. So this is kind of a continuation of the free visualization, but now when the purpose of the stage is working on composition. So I don't necessarily want to integrate it right away into the first sketch, because first sketch has to be a little bit more free. If we're going to think about composition too much, it's going to make the sketch much harder to utilize. So because of this, we will still try to integrate composition, but in a little bit more free and simple way for now. Yep. So, and then later we will integrate compositional balance as a part of a compositional stage, or stage of the composition. So yeah, what else? So again, we created a connection between storytelling as the visual path inside of the compositional shape. We have a compositional shape as a way to integrate composition using shape. This is something that we have to understand how to do. So I guess the storytelling aspect we kind of covered. So I believe it's pretty clear how to do this. You just create a visual kind of storytelling with those invisible lines, as I showed right here. So again, creating those paths right here, creating a path, and etc. And maybe this is exactly the way to control the look of the shape itself. Maybe thinking about those paths first, and then creating a shape based on those paths will help us to solve this problem. But until then, the composition is still kind of a question mark, because I still don't know how exactly to use the shape itself, like how to create the shape in a controlled way, like how to explain my choices, why exactly I chose this shape. So this is something that we need to think about. Storytelling, visual path inside of the compositional shape, this is much more clear. Body language itself, I believe it's clear too. Just create something that will be recognizable, like view human behavior, analyze human behavior, and try to replicate this human behavior in your work. This is quite simple. I mean, there's not that much of a complexity to it, and almost each line, like of the so for instance, like these hands behind this back actually replicate an actual behavior of the person that not necessarily might be sure about what to do with this one. So it's like, okay, I'm waiting for things to happen. I'm not necessarily sure what to do. So like spreading legs on equal parts could explain, could give us a hint of a body language that this person is quite afraid and not sure what might to happen right here. And usually the position of the spreaded legs means that we are prepared for running or prepare for action. If person basically stays still and both legs are connected, that means the person is quite relaxed. That means that whatever is going to hit this person any second is not going to look good. I mean, this person is not prepared for reacting to this thing. But if person actually has spread out legs, which that means that person is quite ready for whatever might happen. So that means, okay, now legs are spread out. I'm prepared for any kick, or at least I'm prepared for running. I'm prepared for almost everything. So again, this is kind of a psychological aspect of it. This is not something that you will be able to learn. It's more like just look at things, and like there is no book that explains those things. Maybe there is, but whatever. I mean, the posture, the overall, like the fact that he has bent knees, not like truly straight knees, could tell us that is quite hesitant. He is already prepared to run, maybe, like, or I don't know, maybe it's actually could add some type of relax element to it. Again, there's a lot of kind of like thoughts that you have to go through. Like the fact that this character has a certain body language, that he is not necessarily afraid of what's happening here. This is quite comfortable, or I would say relatively comfortable stance for the person to take. I mean, bend in one hand, the other hand, on one leg, the other leg is basically kind of supporting the weight, and the hand gets over this leg to balance things out. So again, it tells a certain thing. I don't necessarily understand what exactly it tells me, but like intuitively I feel like it's the right pose for this certain situation. So again, the body language, this is something that is much harder to control, because this is something that you just feel from your experience, from visualizing things. So let your survival instincts to kick in, and try to use this knowledge that you learn throughout your life by analyzing people's body languages. It's just like more being cautious to your own feeling. Like just listen to yourself, listen what the intuition tells you, and make changes based on this intuition. Again, gravity and balance, this is something that will integrate quite like passively to the body language to make this body language to look balanced and exaggerated. That's it. So this is more like just a visual thing that will make things look better. So this is basically, for now, the only questions that I have is basically association element and the composition element. I believe everything that revolves around dynamic, including body language, is storytelling, and balance and exaggeration. Like the gesture itself is not that hard. I mean, like if you understand the purposes of using it. Now it's much harder to connect it with the shape and connect it Again, we created a connection with the composition, but still we don't know how exactly to use this composition. We also don't know necessarily how to use a controlled way of utilizing certain shapes. So we will work on it in future sessions. Maybe I will have time to work on it outside of the sessions. For today, I guess we're going to end. We talked about quite a lot. In about like 30 minutes, I have to start the other stream on Alex Tabletops. So on that note, we will end the session. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Have a nice day or night, and we'll see you in the next session, which is again is going to be on Friday in Russian. We have 2-day break. So, yep. Tony says bye. I'm saying bye. See you in the next one.